At 2:13 a.m. I heard my wife whispering in the guest room. The problem? I was home alone. I know how it sounds. You think I'm tired, or maybe my mind is playing tricks on me. I thought so too. My wife, Sarah, has been staying at her mother's place across the state for the last 3 days. The house should have been silent. Just me, the hum of the refrigerator, and the ticking of the clock. But then, I heard it. A soft, rhythmic murmuring coming from the end of the hallway. The guest room. It wasn't just any voice. It was her voice. The exact pitch, the same gentle rasp she has when she's telling a secret. Building tension, I sat up in bed, my heart thumping against my ribs like a trapped bird. I checked my phone. No new messages. No missed calls. The digital clock flickered to 2:14 a.m. The whispering didn't stop. It actually got clearer. I stood up, the cold floorboards stinging my feet. I grabbed the heavy flashlight I keep in the nightstand. My hands were shaking so hard I almost dropped it. Every step I took toward that door felt like walking into a nightmare. Why was she here? How did she get in without me hearing the front door? And more importantly, who was she talking to? I reached the guest room door. The whispering stopped for a split second, then started again, but this time, it was more frantic. It sounded like she was arguing with someone. But there was only one voice. Her voice. I put my hand on the cold brass doorknob. My skin crawled. I could hear her now, clear as day. She said, "He's coming, hide under the bed. He can't see us together yet." My blood turned to ice. Who was she talking to? And why did she sound so terrified? I threw the door open and shone my flashlight into the room. The beam cut through the darkness, hitting the empty bed, the dusty dresser, and the open closet door. Nothing. The room was empty. The window was locked from the inside. I stood there, gasping for air, thinking I had finally lost my mind. But then, my flashlight caught something on the floor. A pair of muddy footprints leading from the guest room bed, straight into my own bedroom. The muddy footprints weren't just random. They were small, delicate, exactly like Sarah's favorite pair of boots. But she had taken those boots with her. I followed the trail back to my bedroom, my skin feeling like it was being pricked by 1,000 needles. I stood at the entrance of my own room. The door was slightly ajar, just the way I had left it. I swung the light around. My bed was empty. The window was shut. But then, I saw it. The closet door in my room was vibrating. Someone, or something, was pushing against it from the inside. I didn't think. I just acted. I threw the closet door open, ready to scream, ready to fight. But there was no one there. Only my clothes hanging in the dark. And then, my phone buzzed again. Another text from Sarah. This one said, "I'm in the driveway. I forgot my keys, can you let me in?" I ran to the window and looked down. There she was. Standing under the street lamp, waving up at me. I felt a wave of relief so strong I almost collapsed. I turned to head downstairs, but then I stopped. If Sarah was outside, whose voice was I hearing in the guest room? And more importantly, who made those muddy footprints leading under my bed? I stared at Sarah through the window. She was smiling, holding her bags, waiting for me to unlock the front door. But the cold air in my bedroom felt wrong. I looked back at the muddy footprints. They didn't stop at the closet. They led directly under my bed. I knelt down, my hand trembling as I gripped the flashlight. I didn't want to look. Every instinct told me to run downstairs, to Sarah, to safety. But the whispering started again. Right behind my ear. It wasn't Sarah's voice anymore. It was a distorted, mocking version of it. I clicked the light on and shone it under the bed. There was no monster. No ghost. Just a small, old tape recorder, spinning slowly. And next to it, a single porcelain finger, identical to the ones I found in the museum. I realized then, Sarah wasn't at the door because she forgot her keys. She was at the door because something had already taken her place inside. I looked back at the window. Sarah was gone. The driveway was empty. And then, I heard the front door click open, and her voice whispered from the stairs, "Honey, I'm home. Did you miss us?" I didn't wait to see what was under the bed for more than a second. My brain was screaming at me to get out. I scrambled to my feet, nearly tripping over the rug, and bolted down the stairs. I reached the front door and fumbled with the locks, my breath coming in jagged gasps. I threw the door open, ready to pull Sarah inside and drive as far away as possible. But the driveway was empty. The street lamp flickered overhead, casting long, dancing shadows on the pavement, but there was no sign of her. No car, no bags, no Sarah. I stepped out onto the porch, calling her name. The air was unnaturally still. No crickets, no wind. Just the sound of my own pulse drumming in my ears. And then, I saw it. A single, muddy boot print on the very top step of the porch. It was pointing into the house. I backed away from the step, retreating into the hallway. My hand hit the small table in the foyer, and I remembered the tape recorder I saw under the bed. I realized I was still holding my phone. I looked at the last text Sarah sent me. The time stamp on the message wasn't 2:13 a.m. It was from 3 days ago. The exact moment she left for her mother's. My phone hadn't buzzed at all tonight. The notifications I thought I saw, they weren't real. My mind was being fed exactly what it expected to see. Then, a voice erupted from the darkness of the upstairs landing. It wasn't whispering anymore. It was loud, distorted, and it sounded like a dozen people speaking at once. It said, "You shouldn't have opened the closet, Racket. Now the collection is incomplete." I looked up. A dark liquid was beginning to seep through the ceiling, dripping onto the hardwood floor. It smelled like old paper and copper. I knew I had to leave, but the front door slammed shut behind me, the deadbolt clicking into place on its own. I was trapped. The only way was up. I ran back toward the stairs, but they seemed longer, stretching out into the dark. I bypassed the guest room and my bedroom, heading straight for the attic pull-down ladder. I had to know what started this. In the attic, I found the 1926 portrait again. But it had changed. The man in the suit was gone. In his place was a figure that looked exactly like me, dressed in the same clothes I was wearing right now. And standing next to the figure, was a porcelain version of Sarah, her eyes frozen in a silent scream. I felt a sharp pain in my hand. I looked down and gasped. My skin was turning white. It was becoming hard, smooth, and cold to the touch. The transformation was starting. I was becoming the next piece of the museum. The whispering returned, coming from the walls themselves. 13, they chanted. The 13th soul to keep the house alive. I grabbed the heavy iron fireplace poker from the corner and smashed the portrait. The canvas tore, but instead of wood behind it, there was a hollow space filled with hundreds of wedding rings. Each ring had a date. 1940, 1965, 1992, and at the very bottom, a gold band with my wedding date engraved on the inside. I realized Sarah hadn't left 3 days ago. She had never left the house at all. I followed the sound of the chanting down through the floorboards. It led me to the one place I never went, the cellar. The door was already open, a faint, flickering candlelight spilling out from the stairs. I descended into the damp, cold air. The walls were lined with those same glass bottles I saw in my dreams. In the center of the room stood a figure. It was wearing Sarah's clothes, but its face was a smooth, featureless mask of white clay. It held a small glass bottle out to me. Inside, a tiny flicker of light was dancing. "Drink," the mask whispered. "Drink and stay with us forever." I realized the whispering I heard at 2:13 a.m. wasn't Sarah warning me. It was her soul, trapped in that bottle, trying to tell me to run before the mask found me. I swung the iron poker at the figure's head. It shattered like a ceramic vase, but there was no blood. Just dust and more wedding rings. I grabbed the bottle with the light inside and ran for the cellar window. I smashed the glass and crawled out into the cold night air. I didn't stop running until I reached the main road. I looked back at the house. Every window was glowing with a pale, ghostly light. And there, standing in the guest room window, was a figure waving at me. I looked down at the bottle in my hand. The light inside was fading. I unscrewed the cap, hoping to set her free. But as the light escaped, it formed a shape in the air, a shape that looked exactly like me. And then, I felt the coldness reach my heart. As the light from the shattered bottle touched the freezing night air, it didn't fly away to heaven. It didn't vanish. It began to swirl, thick and glowing, taking a shape right in front of my eyes. A shape I knew all too well. I watched, paralyzed, as a translucent version of myself stood on that empty, dark road. It wasn't Sarah's soul I had been holding. It was my own. The whispering wasn't her voice, it was a recording of my own subconscious, screaming at me to stop before it was too late. The figure turned to look at me. It didn't have eyes, just two hollow pits filled with that same pale, ghostly light. It reached out a hand, and as its fingers brushed my chest, I felt a sensation of absolute zero. My vision started to flicker, like a television losing its signal. The cold was no longer just a feeling, it was becoming my existence. Just then, I saw headlights cutting through the fog. It was Sarah's silver SUV. My heart leapt, this was my chance. I tried to yell, to scream her name, but no sound came out of my throat. I was nothing but a silent shadow on the asphalt. The car slowed down right next to the translucent me. I watched, paralyzed, as the me standing there suddenly became solid. His skin regained its color, his eyes sparkled with life, and he looked perfect. He looked more like me than I did. Sarah stepped out of the car, her face lighting up with a smile that broke my heart. She ran to him, to the imposter, and threw her arms around his neck. "I missed you so much," she whispered. He kissed her forehead, but over her shoulder, his eyes met mine. He gave me a slow, wicked grin, and then they both walked toward the house, leaving me behind in the dark. I stood in the middle of the dark road, watching them walk inside my house. I tried to move, to run after them and punch that imposter, but my feet felt like they were made of lead. Every step I took forward felt like I was being pulled backward by an invisible chain. I screamed at the top of my lungs, but the only sound was the wind whistling through the dry leaves. I wasn't just invisible, I was being erased. I looked down at my hands, they were flickering like a dying candle, turning from solid to shadow every few seconds. The streetlights overhead began to hum with a deafening, high-pitched noise. The road beneath me started to dissolve, turning into a black, bottomless void. I realized then, the house wasn't just a building. It was a predator, and I was finally being swallowed whole. The black void didn't last long. I felt a sudden, violent jolt, and the next thing I knew, I wasn't on the road anymore. I was standing in the corner of the guest room. But I couldn't move. My arms were locked in a reach, my fingers stiff and cold. I tried to blink, but my eyelids were frozen open. I looked into the mirror across the room, and my heart, if I still had one, stopped. I wasn't a man anymore. I was a smooth, white, porcelain statue. My face was a perfect, silent mask of the terror I felt inside. I wasn't alone. In the shadows of the room, 12 other statues stood, their eyes fixed on me. They weren't decorations, Rakib. They were the others. The men from 1940, 1980, and every decade before. We weren't guests in this house. We were the collection. The room was dead silent, yet my head was filled with a deafening roar. It was the whispers. Thousands of them. They weren't coming from the hallway anymore, they were coming from the statues around me. Each one was a hollow, echoing memory of a life stolen. I looked at the statue nearest to me. A man in a 1940s suit, his porcelain face cracked with age. His eyes, though frozen, seemed to be screaming. "Don't fight it," he whispered inside my mind. "The more you resist, the more it hurts when the next one arrives." I realized then that we weren't just statues, we were the battery for this house. Every decade, it lures a man in, mimics his life, and then traps his soul in clay to keep the walls from crumbling. We are the guest room that never lets anyone leave. Time began to lose all meaning. Seconds felt like hours, and days blurred into centuries. From my frozen position in the guest room, I could see through the open door into the hallway. Every night, the me who had stolen my life would walk past. He wore my favorite shirt. He used my cologne. He laughed at the same jokes Sarah made. He was living my life better than I ever did. But every night, exactly as the clock hit 2:12 a.m., he would stop at the guest room door and look directly at me. He would lean against the doorframe, a hungry, predator-like smile on his face. He knew I was in there. He knew I could see him. He would tap his fingers on the wood, a slow, rhythmic sound that echoed in the silence of the museum. "Don't worry, Rakib," he whispered one night. "The next guest is already on his way. Your shift is almost over." The Pami who lived in my house didn't just live there. He was a gardener, and the house was his garden. One night, I watched him walk into the guest room carrying a small, old wooden chest. He sat on the bed, my bed, and opened it. Inside were hundreds of those tiny glass bottles, each one empty and waiting. He took one out and placed it carefully under the guest room bed. Then, he pulled out a small tape recorder, the same one I had seen before. He leaned into the microphone and whispered, but it wasn't his voice anymore. It was Sarah's voice. "Honey, come here. I have a secret to tell you." I realized then, the whispers I heard weren't Sarah. They were the bait. The house uses the voice of the person you love most to lure you into the guest room at exactly 2:13 a.m. It's a perfectly timed trap, and I was just the latest fool to fall for it. He looked at my porcelain face and winked. "The next one is a writer," he said. "He'll love the story we're about to tell him." I finally understood. This house isn't just a building, it's a living trap. Sarah never went to her mother's house. The woman I said goodbye to 3 days ago, she wasn't Sarah. She was a manifestation created by the house itself. This place feeds on our love and trust to harvest our souls. We, the porcelain statues, are the very life force that keeps these walls standing. Time froze. Suddenly, I felt my stone skin begin to crack. Was I finally getting free? No. I looked in the mirror and saw a new shadow emerging from within my porcelain shell. That shadow began to walk out of the guest room. I tried to scream, but my mouth was frozen in stone. I realized then, the one who took my place, his time was up. Now it was my turn, to lure the next victim into this room. I woke up in my own bed, drenched in sweat. I checked the clock. It was 2:12 and 59 seconds a.m. I sighed in relief. It was all just a nightmare. But then, from the guest room next door, I heard that familiar whisper. It was Sarah's voice. I stood up, my feet moving toward the door as if they had a mind of their own. I had done this before. I would do it again. At 2:13 a.m. I heard my wife whispering in the guest room. The problem? I was home alone.